Welcome to another episode of Prepper Talk Radio, radio for the ready-minded, the podcast for the prepared. We're to help you get more prepared in your life as it pertains to God, family, and country. Today we have a special episode. We have a guest on who is fighting the good fight and helping us to find solutions to the problems that are out there in specifically the food supply chain and what's going on. So we're going to introduce our guest in a minute. But before we do that, I want to just remind everybody to go to preppertalkradio.com. And if you go and click on free resources and then download anything that you have there or need there. But more importantly, you sign up for our email distribution list and we can reach out and we can stay in touch. And also go to our Facebook group at Emergency Prep and Self-Reliance. So I was actually on a live the other day. Somebody else was doing a podcast live and I was listening, and this guy AJ came on and he was talking about the food chain, the supply chain. He was talking about the problems that we're seeing with the government coming in and really cracking down on these ranchers and farmers. And he had some solutions, and I was like, you know what, I'm going to reach out to this guy and see if he'll come on the show and talk about some of the same things. And so here we have today, AJ, thanks for being on Prepper Talk Radio. Thanks for helping us out. We have listeners all around the world, but we have a lot more in the United States and America. So we're going to see if we can provide some solutions. So thanks for being on the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Paris. It's great to meet y'all.
Nice to meet you as well.
So AJ,
I know.
Tell us a little bit about your background. What got you? What is your background that you could do something like this and have the influence to really make a change?
Well, how I have the influence is purely through God, because
Amen.
My background, now I do have a background. I grew up in the proximity of some incredible fifth generation producers. My family are the Bundy Ranchers. So if you know that story. So I grew up listening to the challenges that they were facing, even as a young man. Just, Bureau of Land Management making changes, Western Watershed suing the Bureau of Land Management that was reducing grazing rights. I mean, just one thing after another. There was always a lot of stress around the conversation of being a cattle rancher, and so I grew up in that sort of space and just seeing the tyranny that was facing our producers. But I was also teased from my cousins as being the city slicker cousin. So, I did the cattle drives and the brandings as often as I could. But, if my mom was my dad, I'd be a rancher. But my mom married a guy from Sandy, Utah. And so we weren't ranching. So, and I hated that as a kid, being teased that way, because I wanted so much to be part of what they were. And I wanted that lifestyle, but it just wasn't in the cards for me. However, as an adult and God working in mysterious ways, I lived in Phoenix, Arizona for 12 years. I had the first CrossFit gym in Mesa, Arizona. And so I come to this fight with both the understanding of urban and rural. And that's where the disconnect is, right? The urbanites depend on our producers and they have no idea that they do. They're really so disconnected from their food supply. And also because I grew up rural with my family, I understood that they also don't know how to communicate to urban, whether it's how they operate, whether it's our beliefs versus the people in the city's beliefs. There's a lack of communication, and yet we depend on each other. And throughout history, governments have pitted urbanites against the rural community to do their evil bidding. And so we as people should come together and do that without the government involved. So that's how I grew up. And then I've always, my uncle told me one time, if you want to be a millionaire rancher, start with 10. And so I always tried to find a way to go make $10 million so that I could just get into the business. And I was willing to lose it if I was living the lifestyle, so it's like this inside joke around ag. But I was doing all of these other things, hoping for one day to make enough money that I could get into agriculture. And when I was in Phoenix, I started a company that was a sports entertainment company. We were broadcasting live 4 times a year to 250,000 live viewers, anywhere from 300 to 600 people in-house that paid tickets to be there, and then ended up bankrupting. I didn't know what I was doing as a young entrepreneur. I filled my cap table too full, so there was nowhere for investors to come in, and CrossFit sued me and all kinds of roadblocks. But ultimately, the bankruptcy brought me back to Utah. About 2018, 2019 is when we ended up back in St. George. And I'm like, you know what? I'm done trying to like do all these things to become part of ag. Let me just go get into ag. So I called one of my cousins and I said, can I sell beef for your ranch? And he was like, absolutely. So, they're a cow-calf operation. They were too large to take on all of the challenges of going direct themselves. And so it worked out that I was willing to do the marketing, do the sales, do the fulfillment. And so that's where we started at the end of 2019. And then COVID hit. And in the beginning of COVID, it was great because people were like, oh, crap, we better find where our food's coming from. And we started growing. But shortly after COVID hit and all of the meat packing houses closed because people were sick, we called to schedule our next round of slaughter. And they said, yeah, we can get you in 18 months. And yep.
Wow.
So even today, the average wait time in Utah for processing is somewhere around 9 months, just depending on what time of year you're trying to get scheduled. And it's that way across the country, and in some cases, much worse. Some places you can't even find a slaughterhouse within 6 hours one way. So
is that because there's just not enough slaughterhouses anymore?
Yeah, it's because consolidation over decades, they closed down. They're gone.
Wow.
I mean, we have about 2,500 USDA slaughterhouses across the nation, and that's nothing. And about 10,000, I think, is the estimate of slaughterhouses all told, which is USDA and state inspected. So you're talking about all of our food supply, all of our meat supply going through 10,000 slaughterhouses nationwide. And the reason that happens is because, the big four meat processors, they control 85% of the market. 85% of our of our meat is being processed in 20 slaughterhouses, give or take.
Wow.
Really?
Yes. Matter of fact, there's a case study in 2019, a slaughterhouse that did 6,000 head a day, which is normal for those size of operations, burnt down in Kansas, and you saw a direct reflection the next day in cattle prices and meat prices because they're so big that's what happens. You affect the market right away.
So there's a lot of those fires we've been hearing about and whatnot. I know not all of them were beef processing. Some of them were other food. And I'm sure though that you're keeping your ear to the ground on that stuff. Like, we've seen a lot of those, haven't we?
Yeah, a lot of them. I mean, there's somebody had a list out the other day of all of our food manufacturing facilities that have been destroyed just in the last 4 years. And it's scary. I mean, I tell people now, I'm like, listen, we're working as hard and fast as we can, but you may want to learn how to process an animal because you might not have a choice other than to buy it and do it yourself.
Wow.
So yeah, 18 months. And I'm like, crap. And so we drove around to every single processing facility we could squeeze into. And so then that came with a whole bunch of other problems. There's already not enough margin in beef. So I'm driving, there was a day I drove 12 hours in a single day, just bouncing around 3 different slaughterhouses to pick up what we had processed to get it back to Utah to fulfill. And the time and the fuel and all of those costs, I'm just like, this ain't working. So I end up stopping. During that time though, I was doing anything to make ends meet. I was in the middle of having a bankruptcy and picking myself up off the floor and trying to figure out what the heck is next. And I was driving for Instacart, just slinging mud for concrete company when I could, just whatever it took. Yeah. And I think I was driving for Instacart and I heard the news say, there's no meat in the store shelves. And yet I'm in the country and I see fat cattle standing in the field. And I had this aha moment. Why doesn't somebody build a software that's like Airbnb, but instead of short-term rentals, it's local food? Somebody should help the consumers connect with the producers because neither of them know how to communicate. So if we build a platform that makes that process simpler, then it should work. And so I'm like, yeah, somebody should do that because I don't know anything about software, right? And I even tried to pass this idea off to a buddy and he's like, nope. And I'm like, okay, tried. Well, God wouldn't let me sleep. For the next 2 weeks, I'd lay down my head at night and I would picture this man I saw in Iraq when we took care packages into his village, watching us feed his family. And I hadn't thought about that man in 20 years because I haven't been there since, about that long.
Mm-hmm.
And even when I was there, my awareness of him wasn't the same way I was being made aware of him now. Looking back, I know it was Heavenly Father was like, yo, I nudged you for a weird reason. Like, this inspiration is not for nothing.
Yeah.
And so then I started the process of figuring out, like, I don't know anything about software. So who do I got to talk to? So long story short, that's what kind of got me into this space and seeing the supply chain crumbling and then starting to pay attention to why and what centralization has done. And now it's been 4 years of nothing but research and understanding what we've done to ourselves and where we're at as a nation and what our government is doing to continue. The favorite tool of the communists is starvation. And we
control the food supply.
Yeah.
Control the people.
Exactly.
You know what? I want to speak a minute to something you said earlier, that most of the people in urban America, or city slickers, as you call them earlier, have no clue what's going on. And that was funny because this woke, college in Gen X, whatever she was, she's like, I don't like hunting. Why don't you just go to the store and buy your meat like everybody else? And I was like, do you know how the store gets the meat, you knucklehead? Yeah. Like, it was so funny, the disconnect in the reality of, like, you just go to the store and buy meat. That's You don't hunt. That's so inhumane to hunt. And I was just like, oh my word.
Or just the other viral video of the young lady who would go to the store and buy lemons, and she had a lemon tree in her backyard. She didn't know she could go out and pick it off the tree and actually use it. She had no idea. She's all, am I the only one? I'm like, yes, you are the only one. So it's absolutely ignorance on the city slickers part. Yeah, absolutely.
Well, let's back it up a little bit, because it's not all city slickers, right? You guys are suburbanites. I'm a suburbanite. Like, I grew up next to a dairy. My Riverbend Ranch up in Idaho, half of that was my grandma's ranch. Like, my great grandma sold that to, I forget his name, but I'm 1.5 generations off the farm.
Yep.
Right. But so I have a different perspective than a lot of my neighbors, but most people are aware, but there is a generation that is completely blissfully, painfully unaware of what the reality of the world is. Mm-hmm. And I think the challenge that I found with a lot of people, and it was for me for a while, was finding the resources, because I would rather bypass the market if I can.
Yep. And
go direct. Before I started doing the podcast, I'd have a neighbor that was like, hey man, do you want to split a cow with me? And I'm like, I don't have anywhere to put that meat. And honestly, it's me. My wife doesn't want to eat a whole cow or a half a cow. I would love to, but I just didn't have the time or space to do anything. And now I'm like, okay, let's talk cows now. So this is super opportune, because finding all the other resources and ways is huge. And there's a lot, in super big cities, there's a lot of people who have no clue.
Yeah.
But there's also the people who do, and they're like, well, how do I fix this? And that's, I think, why this conversation is so vital right now, because people don't have a clue where to go. They may have a clue what they need, but they don't know where to go, where to get the resources.
Yeah.
Or they may just be completely lost. Or, no offense to those of you who are listening, because you're probably not this, but you may know someone who's just not all there in common sense. They when they checked out, they forgot to pick up their change.
Well, and there's so much,
have no common sense,
so many lies and so much propaganda about the food industry, not just meat industry, but food industry in particular, about, well, this is dangerous. You can't drink raw milk. It's dangerous. And people tend to believe that. And that, I think, is one of the first things that need to be overcome. And Scott, you mentioned that we're all kind of suburbanites. I'm in transition. I'm transitioning. Yep. AJ, I've got property out in beef in cattle country out in Duchesne County.
Nice.
And so I've got cows all around me. And so I'm getting to know all the beef processors in that area. And there's quite a few. Nice. I don't know what their schedules look like. Now that we're talking about it, I think I'm going to just make some calls and just get a feel for how backed up are you guys. I'm looking at some of their sites here as we talk here and say, now accepting appointments. and but it doesn't show a calendar. So I'm going to make some of that my homework to figure out really what does this look like out in my neck of the woods, out in Duchesne County, out that way, where there's an awful lot of cattle, awful lot of resources for me.
Yeah. Well, you said it well a second ago that if your grandfather wasn't in farming, you're disconnected. You don't know. So it's not all urbanites. I mean, I lived in Mesa for 12 years. That's urban. Mm-hmm. But my family were in ag, so they get it. Somebody did a study during COVID, 2020, towards the end of the year of 2020, with kids in New York, and about the food that was not there on the stores anymore. And the kids genuinely asked, like, why don't they just make more? Like, they thought that it comes from a factory. Mm-hmm. They're so disconnected, they had no idea. So if your grandparents were not in farming, you probably have no idea, unless you've become aware of it through other sources, how all of this works.
And sadly, though, there's labs out there that are starting to learn to grow meat. Yes. And that scares the living daylights out of me, because if you can grow meat, and where are they growing it from? How are they growing it? And then they're like, and then this whole big push right now to eat bugs for protein. I'm like, whoa, dude, no.
Yeah.
God put cattle on the earth for a reason, and part of it is to help us, eat some meat.
Let's go back to, you started talking about grown meat, right? What cells do they use to grow the meat? Those are cancerous cells. I have not found a single lab that I've researched that is not using cancerous cells to grow meat. They're 3D printing meat, basically, using cancerous cell, lab-grown, weird crap. That, would you knowingly, willfully put cancerous tumors into your mouth, chomp on them for a good five chomps, and then swallow? No way, man. But in interviews in the UK, people are like, oh wow, this is fascinating, you're growing meat. Ask the question, how? If it's not grown on a stocky cow or bull out in the field, like I don't want it. Like if it's not out roaming, I don't want it. And then if it's being injected, because now the other thing is all the mRNA vaccines that they're trying to push onto the industry. Like, there's so many weird, crazy things that are being pushed that we just don't want.
I think that to talk a little bit more about the lab grown meat and the fake meat, my perception is there's a push towards intellectual food property and control. I think the big food and big pharma are one and the same. Big food is the biggest lead generator, if you understand marketing, for big pharma. Because if big food can make you sick, which they own both, shareholders in both. If big food will make you sick, then big pharma will heal you. Well, big pharma, what they did very well was bastardize homeopathy and push people away from natural remedies towards pharmaceuticals, and even outlawed many naturopathic medicines that are healing to make you be stuck on SSRIs or other things that actually don't heal and make you chemically dependent. I think what we're seeing is the same playbook working its way through our food supply chain. If I can vilify cattle and make it illegal to have cows, your only choice for food is the food I own the intellectual property to make or manufacture. There's just too many similarities and things happen around that. And we also know, and maybe some don't, but our government is 100% controlled by corporate oligopolies who pay them under the table. That's why you have our politicians going in there for a 6-figure a year job, low 6-figure, and leaving with millions of dollars in the bank. That money came from somewhere, and those policies that they've pushed were affected by the people that were paying them under the table, which, by the way, there's a new act being pushed through Congress called the Sustains Act. The Sustains Act will allow direct business between private entity and federal government. So what that looks like is, rather than bribing you under the table, Paris, let's say you're with the USDA and I'm with JBS. I don't have to bribe you secretly anymore. I can sponsor in something you're doing openly for $1 billion. Wow. Are you ever going to regulate anything I'm doing because I'm your biggest supporter? No. Wow. That's actively being pushed through right now. And so these policies that are being pushed through, it's collectivization of our farms and ranches, which one of my favorite books is Red Famine. Red Famine is basically Stalin's war on Ukraine. What they did was they forced collectivization of their farms, and then they said, you need to meet these quotas. And then that led to the starvation and death of 3 to 7 million people, most notably peasants. But do you know what peasants are in our terms today? Blue collar.
Yep.
Farmers, ranchers, any blue collar. So they had the intelligentsia, that's what they called them, the intelligentsia, the educated people of the cities. And what Stalin did was convince the people in the urban communities that the rural communities were not human. They weren't normal. And so then all of a sudden the rural communities started getting flooded with these urbanites, these intelligentsia, who were the ones that were there to enforce collectivization and grain requisitions that led to the starvation of millions of the blue collar people of Ukraine. And so that's why it's so important that we find a way to bridge the communication between urban and rural, so that if there's an attempt to make urbanites believe something about the rural community, they know, first of all, if they go, you're going to starve.
Yeah.
Because it wasn't just the rural community ended up starving. It was the people in the
everybody.
city. Well, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, AJ, I know that this is not in America, but I'm sure you're aware of what's going on. Like we hear about the Netherlands and France, and I don't know. I mean, they're doing some things over there with their farmers that I'm sure are going to trickle down to us and ripple effect over to us. What are you seeing? Are you like, I know on the news it's pretty big that the farmers over there got all kinds of regulations and they fought back and they were able to, get back on. They were able to fight and get some things answered, and at least in one of the, some of the things that are happening there. But like you said, we're having this all these acts and these bills kind of sneaking through. So what can you talk to about like what they were doing and what was happening to them, and how is it happening to us? And then how were they able to fight and win at least take back some ground? And what can we do to do the same?
Yeah, that's a great question, because one of the things that's happening right now that I've heard from producers in other countries message, whatever you do, don't let them track your cattle.
Oh,
well, the omnibus bill that just passed, when they funded all that money the last time, not the most recent one, but the last time where all of us taxpayers paid billions of dollars for Ukraine, they snuck in $15 million for the USDA to start experimenting with RFID ear tags. Well, when they were pushing it through, they said, well, this is voluntary only. We're just researching it and studying it. Now, anybody with any sort of brain cell count between their two ears knows that. And just this week, I mean, it hasn't even been 2 months, 3 months since that passed. They're now using the bird flu to enforce RFID on all livestock over 18 months. That's if it goes across state lines, and that's everything. And so the one thing everybody in Europe said, do not let them do, has now been shoved through, because that's what our government is doing right now. They're just shoving things through whether we, the people, want it or not. So now RFID ear tags are required for all cattle crossing state lines that's 18 months or older, which is all of them. Now, here's the problem with that. The early problem with that is this. I live in Wyoming. There's only 500,000 people in the state of Wyoming and millions of cattle. That means every single producer, if they're selling fat cattle or anything over 18 months, must now comply. They don't have to comply, but now they're being required to comply before they sell that outside the state. Well, it all needs to leave the state, but they used the bird flu to push that through. Bill Bullard, who is the CEO of RCAF USA, they are the most incredible organization. I'm always appealing to people. I'm not part of their organization other than I'm a member. I paid in, because they're the ones fighting these things at the federal level. They're the ones, like, I can stand on my hill and fight on my hill, which is Consumer Direct, because they're fighting on the legal hill. So Bill was just talking about this RFID and how everything was going on, and that So consumers should support them because that $150 a year membership, they use that to go fight these fights and do what they've got to do.
All right, say it clearly. What's the organization again?
RCAF USA. So R-CAF, CALF USA.
.USA or USA.com?
USA.com. Yep.
Okay, awesome. We'll put it in the link in the description too. I'll write that down.
Yeah. So anyway, the one thing that these guys in Europe were saying avoid at all costs is now here and being enforced. Oh, it was the bird flu. That's what Bill was talking about. He spoke about the bird flu. Bird flu is devastating to the birds. It is not devastating to cattle. They haven't, when he was talking about it, they haven't lost any cattle to a bird flu. And then the news talked about how it's jumped species and now it's in the first case in humans. They didn't tell you what the extent of that was. They just told you it's now inside of a human. He had diarrhea.
Oh, geez.
That's it. But they're not going to tell you because it's propaganda. So now they can force through these other policies. So this is my concern and what Americans need to wake up to. Collectivization is happening, but instead of at the end of a gun through a communist regime, it's at the whip of a pen through a communist regime.
I like that. Yeah, they say the pen is mightier than sword, and I think we're seeing that.
We are.
I think we need to be. That's one of the things where it's so hard because and they distract us with life, our 9 to 5. They distract us with consumerism. They keep the ads rolling so that we're constantly wanting to just go here, go there, buy this, buy that, vacation here, vacation there. We're overwhelmed after we get home. So just plop down on the couch, watch 36 hours of TV. And then they're over there just planning the whole thing. And, 5-6 years later, we're like, wait a minute, why am I in a concentration camp? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's because you weren't paying attention. And that's part of, our show, our podcast, our listeners we're trying to help educate, inform, help them become aware and see what we can do to help effectuate some change. So we got about maybe 10 more minutes left here. What can we do? What can we do to prepare ourselves? So obviously we believe and we talk about food storage. We talk about growing your own food, getting a garden. I mean, even the government with that is coming out and saying that, hey, your carbon footprint is too big if you breathe too much or something ridiculous. And so we talk about those types of things. What are, of course, we need to coordinate and we need to collaborate with local farmers, local ranchers. But what can we do first, just ourselves?
Yeah. Learn how to store up food, canning, freeze drying. That's one thing you can do right away. Those two things are not that difficult. And to get into canning, it's not a huge investment to buy a canner and get that going. So that would be the first thing I'd say. The other thing is if you got a small piece of backyard, meat rabbits. We're starting meat rabbits. You can get 450 pounds of meat from 3 females and 1 male.
Wow.
A year. And so you get three female meat rabbits and a male, and you've got all the meat you need to feed your family, depending on the size of your family, of course, in a little meat rabbit thing in the backyard. So that's one thing. Go to your local farmers markets. That's another thing. Meeting them right where they're at. That's a huge help for those producers because when you're at the farmers market, they didn't have to spend any money in packaging. The new middleman for those that are trying to get out of the big system is going direct, or those getting out of the big system are going direct. But the new middleman, when they make the shift, they find out, oh crap, we spend just as much or lose just as much: boxes, insulation, dry ice, shipping. So farmers markets are phenomenal. We're going to end up launching a From the Farm farmers markets just to make fulfillment simpler and the connection easier and reduce the inputs for the producers. So all of those things are tremendously valuable. At the farmers market, you actually literally get to shake their hand and ask them about their operation. So I highly recommend the farmers market. Now you got to find the right one. A lot of them look like craft fairs,
Right?
Not a whole lot of food. And then, of course, what we built from the farm is the Airbnb of local food. And we launched that a couple of months ago, and that's growing very well. And we've partnered with some incredible people in Utah, companies in Utah that are going to help us make this a household name so that we can shorten the food supply chain there.
Let me show the website real fast. I'm trying to, I had it. I'm not finding it real quick here. What in the hell? I'm just going to share the window because I don't know why the tab doesn't show up. So this is your website, FromTheFarm.io. So if you're listening, that's FromTheFarm.io. And when I first brought this up, there was a pop-up box that said, "What's your address?" I entered in my my zip code, and then it showed farms on the map. Farms supposedly near me. And so you click that button, and right now there's not a lot of farms near me, but I'm sure that's going to grow as people start to use this. Is that?
Yeah, if you zoom out right where you're at, zoom out, and you'll start seeing them populate as we've gotten them onboarded. You know, so that's where we're at right now. Is our number one focus is to onboard more across the nation. We've got some campaigns that are getting ready to launch. We partnered with Harmon Brothers Marketing. I don't know if you're familiar with them. They did Squatty Potty and Purple Bed, and they also helped do the crowdfunding for Chosen and Sound of Freedom. We are very aligned with our mission and purpose. The one thing I'll say about us, and I can't speak for anybody else out there doing what we're doing or trying to do what we're doing, we are not for sale. This was a calling. God asked me to do this. And along with that, to never sell. Because as we develop this, it will not be unlikely that JBS or one of the big corporations will try to buy it out. So when you're starting to support these things, these companies that are popping up to try to make a difference, find out who the owners are and find out what their commitment is. Because if you help grow the platform, you should know that it's going to be around for generations for you and your family. Because our main goal is to stop the bleeding of our producers. We cannot lose anymore. We are less than 800,000 ranchers nationwide.
Wow. So if somebody is a farmer, even if it's a homesteader, and they go to farmers markets, should they come here and click sign up and then become a place where people can, a producer?
Yeah. So that'd be great. If they scroll to the bottom of the screen, they'll see sign up now. We're working on a new landing page that's a little bit more over there to the right. It's a little bit more educational and helps drive traffic a little bit more directly. This was our MVP, right? We take a very small commission because this is a mission. We did not design this to be, we will make a small profit based on our numbers, but we're not trying to become billionaires. We're trying to make sure we don't lose any more of our family farms and ranches and help all of these people that are leaving the city that want to go and grow food. We think that we can help inspire a new agrarian movement and get more people to get, just like Airbnb did. How many people got into short-term rentals because the system and the marketing was in place for them to get involved? That's our same mission. So anybody who's sitting in a cubicle, man, I wish I could be working on a farm or my own homestead. I just don't know how I can do all the sales and the marketing and everything. We're here to help you. So you do not, if you have any excess amount of food, sign up. You do not have to be a big producer. And I think the small homesteads are going to become similar to the victory gardens of World War II, where it'll be the small but large in number that will save our butts as things get hairy.
That's awesome. So if I want to come and buy food from local farmers, I can log in and sign up as a person wanting to find these farmers or producers. But if I'm a producer, I can come sign up as a producer where I can sell my wares, so to speak, on this site, or at least announce that I have what I'm selling. Like does it differentiate? So, hey, I grow, I don't know, maybe somebody grows corn and that's what they want to sell. Or maybe somebody grows, quail eggs and that's what they want to sell.
Yeah.
This will allow you to say, hey, this is what I'm offering. This is what I'm producing. If you'd like to buy some, here it is. And is that kind of how it will work?
That's right. We're meat right now only because we had to start with something to get open. Our development team is right now working on all other farm products, dairy, grain, produce. So those will all be on here soon. And so, yeah, if you have any food that you're growing, you can be on here and be listed and sell direct. There are going to be certain laws by certain states, like cottage laws that allow you to sell within the state without any regulation, as long as it's not crossing state lines. So that'll vary state by state, but yeah, we're here for anybody who's growing food to list it and not have to worry about the marketing side. We're going to do that for you.
That's awesome. All right. So FromTheFarm.io, if you are somebody who produces food in excess of what your family needs and you go to farmers markets already and you want to kind of up your opportunity to sell more, come here and sign up to be a producer. If you are somebody who's looking for beef, meat that's local grown and want to be able to purchase, is there a requirement that you're going to do for people who maybe are producing meat that, hey, it's got to be clean, it can't be filled with hormones, it's got to be, kind of that grass fed, more natural? Are you going to have a requirement for that, or
No,
most of the farmers are doing that anyways?
Yeah, that's a great question. We are not going to regulate how you raise your livestock, but we're going to make sure that you're transparent so the consumer can decide. Because some people want that corn and grain finished beef. That's their favorite. They do not like grass fed. Well, great. You should be able to buy that from a producer. We're not vilifying any producers that are family owned and operated or privately owned and operated, because we've got to stop the bleeding. If we don't want to starve to death, we've got to stop the bleeding and help these guys grow. Now, you can go on there and search for regenerative or grass-fed or whatever it is, and you're going to find all of that as well. But our job is not to regulate. Now, we will have, and there are, if you look at most of those producers, because I know them personally, they have a blue check. So what we are doing is making sure that they are who they say they are if they have the blue check, because something that not a lot of people are aware of is black market grocery, meaning somebody will go to a big box seller of beef. They will take it home, cut it up, repackage it, and relabel it as if they're a small family farm, and they're not. Or they'll go to Costco and buy a box of oranges and set up a fruit stand and pull all the stickers off, and you think that you're buying fresh produce right from the producer, and it came from the grocery store.
Wow.
Or I don't know, maybe you go to the grocery store and you think you're buying American beef.
Yeah, exactly.
You're buying something from some far off country, and it's all garbage.
Yep.
Yeah. Isn't the bulk of our meat actually, I don't know if this is true, but I've heard comes from other countries like Brazil or something like that?
Yeah, we're at 1950s cattle numbers in the country. We are fully dependent on imported beef at this point.
Wow.
75% of the lamb sold in America is foreign. It's bad. I mean, we're fully captured. So the only thing we could do now is claw our way back to the top, and that's what we're working on. And when we know, through faith, there were times where I'm like, is this even worth it? It's going to fall apart before we're even going.
Yeah.
And in my prayer, the answer was, you've been asked to do it, so why are you questioning it? And maybe this is one of the things that help us get through what's coming. And so we keep going.
Yeah. Well, that's kind of how we started this podcast, and why as well. We're kind of on our own, doing our own thing. And we're like, it's kind of one of the rules of prepping. Don't tell anybody what you're doing. And here we are telling everybody what we're doing. Yeah. And so it's kind of,
But you have to, though, because if you're prepared and your neighbors aren't, then you are not prepared. This has to be a community effort. I mean, seriously, if you're prepared and your neighbors are not, you have more neighbors that are not prepared than are, and they're going to come for it. And listen, as well prepared as you think you are, it's a numbers game. Mm-hmm. And so you might as well get your community around you to get involved, because you can't do it alone.
Amen. Yeah, that's why I'm bugging out to a more prepared community.
Yeah. That's how I feel about Cody. I feel really blessed to be here. That's for sure.
Yeah. Where you are is awesome.
Yeah.
Well, any last minute thoughts? We're going to, in the last minute or two here, anything you want to just say or share, or last minute sign-offs?
Well, I think what I would just say is, I've become more aware because of where I'm moving to, trying to move the family out to, of what is going on in that area, what's being produced, who's doing that. And I think that's going to be the first step, is just learn what's in your area, what your resources are. I live next to a small farming community that is getting smaller and smaller. And there's little small farms there, people that grow things. I say, go get to know those people. And I think you make some great relationships and get some fresh eggs and some fresh vegetables as well. Not necessarily excluding the farmers markets, because we love to go to those as well.
Yeah.
Amen.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah,
I'd say just shake the hand.
Scott, what were you going to say?
I was just going to say, we as individuals need to be bolstering our community. This is a way to do that. This is another way to shorten our supply chain, to take control over our supply chain, and also, again, take money out of the lobbying groups. That's the most dangerous thing right now in our world, is the lobbying groups. Big food, big pharma, they're all trying to push agendas. And the more we can get away from it, the more we can stop funding it, the more freedom we're going to keep.
Yep. They want money and power. And if we don't give them either, we win.
It's over. It's over for them. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
All right. Final thoughts, AJ?
Yeah. My final thought is something you were saying earlier. We are all distracted, but human beings need 3 things: food, shelter, safety. So prioritize. Focus on your food, focus on your shelter, focus on your safety, and then veg out. if that's how it has to be, if you're super exhausted from work, a mentor of mine told me the first 8 hours is for your paycheck. The second 8 hours is for your future. So put your first 8 hours in for your paycheck, and the next few hours, you better be preparing your family. I mean, your job is to protect, provide, and preside. And if you're not doing that, you're in trouble.
I love that. Yeah. I actually talk about that a lot on my other channel. The other thing that I think goes right along with that, AJ, is that your saying that I heard, similar to the one about 8 hours and the second 8 hours, is your 9 to 5 is to put food on the table, and your 5 to 9 is to build your dreams.
Yeah.
And I think that's a similar concept, similar principle. I love that. Thank you so much for being on the show. Thanks for coming. Hopefully we'll stay in touch and stay in communication, because the message that you are putting out there is a similar message to the one we're putting out there. And the more that we can collaborate and coordinate our voices, the more that we'll be able to really bring some change and effectuate the change that we want to see in the world. Thank you again for being on the show. And with that, we'll sign off. You've been listening to Prepper Talk Radio, radio for the ready-minded. We're the podcast for the prepared, where we focus on God, family, and country. And we'll see you on the next one.
Thanks, AJ.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate you.
See you guys.